Hello, my friends. I am back, and we are going to pick back up reading The City of Ember. So the last time we read, we got to know one of our two main characters, Lena, as she had her first day on the job as a messenger and got to run around the city and deliver messages. So we are going to pick back up with chapter 3, and in this chapter, we're going to get to know our other main character, Doon, a little better. Chapter 3, Under Ember. That morning, Doon had arrived at the Pipeworks full of anticipation. This was the world of serious work at last, where he would get a chance to do something useful. What he'd learned in school and from his father and from his own investigations, he could put it all to good purpose now. He pushed open the heavy Pipeworks door and stepped inside. The air smelled strongly of dampness and moldy rubber, which seemed to him a pleasant, interesting smell. He strode up a hallway where yellow slickers hung from pegs on the walls. At the end of the hallway was a room full of people, some of them sitting on benches and pulling on knee-high rubber boots, some struggling into their slickers, some buckling on tool belts. A raucous clamor filled the room. Doon watched from the doorway, eager to join in, but not sure what to do. After a moment, a man emerged from the throng. He thrust out a hand. "Lister Monk, Pipeworks director," he said. "You're the new boy, right? What size feet do you have? Large, medium, or small?" "Medium," said Doon, and Lister found him a slicker and a pair of boots. The boots were so ancient that their green rubber was cracked all over, as if covered with spider webs. He gave Doon a tool belt, too, in which were wrenches and hammers, spools of wire and tape, and tubes of some sort of black goop. "You'll be in Tunnel 97 today," Lister said. "Arlen will go with you and show you what to do." He pointed at a short, delicate-looking girl with a white blonde braid down her back. "She may not look like an expert, but she is." Doon buckled his tool belt around his waist and put on his slicker, which for some reason smelled like sweaty feet. "This way," said Arlen, without saying hello or smiling. She wove through the crowd of workers to the door-marked stairway and opened it. Stone steps led so far down that Doon couldn't see the end of them. On either side was a sheer wall of dark reddish stone, glistening with dampness. There was no railing. Along the ceiling ran a single wire from which a light bulb hung every few yards. Water stood in shallow pools on each stair, in the hollow worn into the stones by years of footsteps. They started down. Doon concentrated on his feet. The clumsy boots made it hard not to stumble. As they went deeper, he began to hear a low roar, so low he seemed to hear it more with his stomach than his ears. It grew louder and louder. What is it, a machine of some kind? Maybe the generator? The stairway came to an end at a door marked Main Tunnel. Arlen opened it, and as they stepped through the door, Doon realized that the sound he had been hearing wasn't a machine. It was the river. He stood still, staring. Like most people, he had never really been sure what a river was, just that it was water that somehow flowed on its own. He'd imagined it would be like the clear, narrow stream that came out of the kitchen faucet, only bigger and horizontal instead of vertical. But this was something entirely different. Not a stream of water, but endless tons of it pouring by. Wide as the widest street in Ember, churning and dipping and swirling, the river roared past, its turbulent surface like black, liquid glass, scattered with flecks of light. Doon had never seen anything that moved so fast, and he had never heard such a thunderous, heart-stopping roar. The path they stood on was about 6 feet wide and ran parallel to the river for farther than Doon could see in both directions. In the wall along the path were openings that must lead, Doon thought, to the tunnels that branched everywhere below the city. A string of lights like the one in the stairway hung high up against the arched ceiling. Doon knew he was standing beneath the north edge of Ember. In school, you were taught to remember the directions this way. North was the direction of the river, south was the direction of the greenhouses, east was the direction of the school, and west was the direction left over, having nothing in particular to mark it. All the Pipeworks tunnels branched off from the main tunnel to the south, toward the city. Arlen leaned toward Doon and shouted into his ear. "First, we'll go to the beginning of the river," she said. She led him up the main tunnel for a long way. They passed other people in yellow slickers, who greeted Arlen with a nod and glanced curiously at Doon. After 15 minutes or so, they came to the east edge of the Pipeworks, where the river surged up from a deep chasm in the ground, churning so violently that its dark water turned white and filled the air with a spray that wet Doon's face. In the wall to their right was a wide double door. "See that door right there?" Arlen shouted, pointing. "Yes," Doon shouted back. "That's the generator room." "Can we go in?" "Of course not," said Arlen. "You have to have special permission." She pointed back down the main tunnel. "Now we'll go to the end of the river," she said. She led him back, past the stairway door, all the way to the west edge of the Pipeworks. There, the river flowed into a huge opening in the wall and vanished into darkness. "Where does it go?" Doon asked. Arlen just shrugged. "Back into the ground, I guess. Now let's find Tunnel 97 and get to work." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "This is the map," she said. "You have one in your pocket, too. You have to use your map to find your way around in here." The map looked to Doon like an immense centipede. The river arched across the top of the page like the centipede's body, and the tunnels dangled down from it like hundreds of long, long legs, all tangled up with each other. To get to Tunnel 97, they followed a complicated route through passageways lined with crusty, rusted pipes that carried water to all the buildings of Ember. Puddles stood on the floor of the tunnel, and water dripped in brown rivulets down the walls. Just as in the main tunnel, there was a string of bulbs along the ceiling that provided dim light. Doon occupied his mind by calculating how far underground he was. From the river to the ceiling of the main tunnel must be 30 feet or so, he said. Above that were the storerooms, which occupied a layer at least 20 feet high, so that meant he was 50 feet underground, with tons of earth and rock and buildings above him. The thought made him tense up his shoulders. He cast a quick glance upward, as if all that weight might collapse onto his head. "Here we are," said Arlen. She was standing next to the leak that spurted a stream of water straight out of the wall. "We have to turn the shut-off valve, take the pipe apart, put on a new connector, and stick it back together again." With wrenches, hammers, washers, and black goop, they did this, getting soaked in the process. It took them most of the morning and proved to Doon that the city was in even worse shape than he had suspected. Not only were the lights about to fail and the supplies about to run out, but the water system was breaking down too. The whole city was crumbling, and what was anyone doing about it? When the lunch break came, Arlen took her lunch sack from a pocket in her tool belt and went off to meet some friends a few tunnels away. "You stay right here and wait until I get back," she said as she left. "If you wander around, you'll get lost." But Doon set out as soon as she disappeared. Using his map, he found his way back to the main tunnel, then hurried to the east end. He wasn't going to wait for special permission to see the generator. He was pretty sure he could find a way to get in on his own, and he did. He simply stood by the door and waited for someone to come out. Quite soon, a stout woman carrying a lunch sack pushed open the door and walked away. She didn't notice him. Before the door could close again, Doon slipped inside. Such a horrendous noise met him that he staggered backward a few steps. It was an ear-splitting, growling, grinding, screaming noise, shot through with a hoarse rackety-rackety sound and underscored with a deep chugga-chugga-chugga. Doon clapped his hands over his ears and stepped forward. In front of him was a gigantic black machine, 2 stories high. It was vibrating so hard it looked as if it might explode any second. Several people wearing earmuffs were busy around it. None of them noticed him come in. He tapped one of them on the shoulder, and the person jumped and whirled around. He was an old man, Doon saw, with a deeply lined brown face. "I want to learn about the generator," Doon screamed, but he might as well have saved his breath. No one could have heard him in the uproar. The old man glared at him, made a shooing motion with his hand, and turned back to work. Doon stood and watched for a while. Beside the huge machine were ladders on wheels that the workers pushed back and forth and climbed on to reach the high parts. All over the room, greasy-looking cans and tools littered the floor. Against the walls stood big bins holding every kind of bolt and screw and gear and lever and rod and tube, all of them black with age and jumbled together. The workers scurried between the bins and the generator, or simply stood and watched the thing shake. After a few minutes, Doon left. He was horrified. All his life he had studied how things worked. It was one of his favorite things to do. He could take apart an old watch and put it back together exactly as it had been. He understood how the faucets in the sink worked. He'd fixed the toilet many times. He'd made a wheeled cart out of the parts of an old armchair. He even had a hazy idea of what was going on in a refrigerator. He was proud of his mechanical talent. There was only one thing he didn't understand at all, and that was electricity. What was the power that ran through the wires and into the light bulbs? Where did it come from? He had thought that if he could just get a look at the generator, he would have the clue he needed. From there, he could begin to work on a solution that would keep the lights of Ember burning. But one glimpse of the generator showed him how foolish he was. He had expected to see something whose workings he could understand, a wheel turning, a spark being struck, some wires that led from one point to another. But this monstrous roaring thing, he wondered if anyone understood how it worked. It looked as if all they were doing was trying to keep it from flying apart. As it turned out, he was right. When the day was over and he was upstairs taking off his boots and slicker, he saw the old man from the generator room and went to talk to him. "Can you explain to me about the generator?" he asked. "Can you tell me how it works?" The old man just sighed. "All I know is the river makes it go." "But how?" The man shrugged. "Who knows? Our job is just to keep it from breaking down. If a part breaks, we gotta put on a new one. If a part freezes up, we gotta oil it." He wiped his hand wearily across his forehead, leaving a streak of black grease. "I've been working on the generator for 20 years. It's always managed to chug along, but this year, I don't know. The thing seems to break down every couple minutes." He cracked a wry smile. "Of course, I hear we might run out of light bulbs before that. and then it won't matter if the generator works or not. Running out of light bulbs, running out of power, running out of time. Disaster was right around the corner. That's what Doon was thinking about when he stopped outside the gathering hall on his way home and saw Lena on the roof. She looked so free and happy up there. He didn't know why she was on the roof, but he wasn't surprised. It was the kind of thing she did, turning up in unexpected places, and now that she was a messenger, she could go just about anywhere. But how could she be so lighthearted when everything was falling apart? He headed for home. He lived with his father in a 2-bedroom apartment over his father's shop in Greengate Square, the small items shop, which sold things like nails, pins, tacks, clips, springs, jar lids, doorknobs, bits of wire, shards of glass, chunks of wood, and other small things that might be useful in some way. The small items shop had overflowed somewhat into their apartment above. In their front room, where other people might display a nice teapot on a tabletop or a few attractive squashes or tomatoes on a shelf, they had buckets and boxes and baskets full of spare items from the shop, things Doon's father had collected but not yet organized for selling. Often, these items spilled over onto the floor. It was easy to trip over things in this apartment, and not a good idea to go barefoot. Today, Doon didn't stop in at the shop to see his father before going upstairs. He wasn't in the mood for conversation. He removed 2 buckets of stuff from the couch, it looked like mostly shoe heels, and flopped down on the cushions. He had been stupid to think he could just understand the generator by looking at it when other people had been working on it their entire lives. The thing was, he had to admit, he always thought he was smarter than other people. He'd been sure he could learn about electricity and help save the city. He wanted to be the one to do it. He had imagined many times a ceremony in Harkin Square, organized to thank him for saving Ember, with the entire population in attendance and his father beaming from the front row. All Doon's life, his father had been saying to him, "You're a good boy and a smart boy. You'll do grand things someday. I know you will." But Doon hadn't done much that was grand so far. He ached to do something truly important, like finding the secret of electricity and, as his father watched, be rewarded for his achievement. The size of the reward didn't matter. A small certificate would do, or maybe a badge to sew on his jacket. Now, he was stuck in the muck at the Pipeworks, patching up pipes that would leak and break again in a matter of days. It was even more useless and boring than being a messenger. The thought made him suddenly furious. He sat up, grabbed a shoe heel out of the bucket at his feet, and hurled it with all his might. It arrived at the front door just as the door opened. Doon heard a hard thwack and a loud ouch at the same moment. Then he saw the long, lean, tired-looking face of his father in the doorway. Doon's anger drained away. "Oh, I hit you, Father. I'm sorry." Doon's father rubbed the side of his head. He was a tall man, bald as a peeled potato, with a high forehead and a long chin. He had kind, slightly puzzled gray eyes. "Got me in the ear," he said. "What was that?" "Got angry for a second," said Doon. "I threw one of these old heels." "I see," said his father. He brushed some bottle tops off a chair and sat down. "Does it have to do with your first day at work?" "Yes," said Doon. His father nodded. "Why don't you tell me about it?" he said. Doon told him. When he was finished, his father ran a hand across his bald head, as if smoothing down the hair that wasn't there. He sighed. "Well," he said, "it sounds unpleasant, I have to admit. About the generator especially. That's bad news. But the Pipeworks is your assignment. No way around it. What you get is what you get. What you do with what you get, though, that's more the point, wouldn't you say?" He looked at Doon and smiled a bit, sadly. "I guess so," Doon said, "but what can I do?" "I don't know," said his father. "You'll think of something. You're a clever boy. The main thing is to pay attention. Pay close attention to everything. Notice what no one else notices. Then you'll know what no one else knows. And that's always useful." He took off his coat and hung it from a peg on the wall. "How's the worm?" he asked. "I haven't looked at it yet," said Doon. He went into his room and came out with a small wooden box covered with an old scarf. He set the box on the table and took the scarf off, and he and his father both bent over to look inside. A couple of limp cabbage leaves lay on the bottom of the box. On one of the leaves was a worm about an inch long. A few days before school ended, Doon had found the worm on the underside of a cabbage leaf he was slicing up for dinner. It was a pale, soft green, velvety smooth all over, with tiny, stubby legs. Doon had always been fascinated by bugs. He wrote down his observations about them in a book he had titled Crawling and Flying Things. Each page of the book was divided lengthwise down the center. On the left, he drew his pictures, with the pencil sharpened to a needle-like point. Moth wings with their branching patterns of veins, spider legs which had minute hairs and tiny feet like claws, beetles with their feelers and their glossy armor. On the right, he wrote what he observed about each creature. He noted what it ate, where it slept, where it laid its eggs, and, if he knew, how long it lived. This was difficult with fast-moving creatures like moths and spiders. To learn anything about them, he had to catch what glimpses he could as they lived their lives out in the open. If you put them in a box, they scrambled around for a few days and then died. This worm, though, was different. It seemed perfectly happy to live in the box Doon had made for it. So far, it did only 3 things: eat, sleep. It looked like it was sleeping, though Doon couldn't tell if the worm closed its eyes, or if it even had eyes, and expel tiny black poop balls. That was it. I've had it for 5 days now, said Doon. It's twice as big as it was when I got it. It's eaten 2 square inches of cabbage leaf. You're writing all this down? Doon nodded. Maybe, said his father, you'll find some interesting new bugs in the Pipeworks. Maybe, said Doon, but to himself he said, no, that's not enough. I can't go plodding around the Pipeworks, stopping up leaks, looking for bugs, and pretending there's no emergency. I have to find something important down there, something that's going to help. I have to. I just have to. Chapter 4. Something lost, nothing found. One day, when Lena had been messenger for several weeks, she came home to find that Granny had thrown all the cushions from the couch onto the floor, ripped up a corner of the couch's lining, and was pulling out wads of stuffing. What are you doing? Lena cried. Granny looked up. Wisps of sofa stuffing stuck to the front of her dress and clung to her hair. Something is lost, she said. I think it might be in here. What's lost, Granny? I don't quite recall, said the old woman. Something important. But Granny, you're ruining the couch. What will we sit on? Granny tore a bit more of the covering off the couch and yanked out another puff of stuffing. It doesn't matter, she said. I'll put it back together later. Let's put it back now, Lena said. I don't think what's lost is in there. You don't know, said Granny darkly. But she sat back on her heels, looking tired. Lena began cleaning up the mess. Where's the baby? She asked. Granny gazed at Lena blankly. The baby? You haven't forgotten the baby. Oh, yes, I think she's down in the shop. By herself? Lena stood up and ran down the stairs. She found Poppy sitting on the floor of the shop, enmeshed in a tangle of yellow yarn. As soon as she saw Lena, Poppy began to howl. Lena picked her up and unwound the yarn, talking soothingly, though she was upset that her fingers trembled. For Granny to forget the baby was dangerous. Poppy could fall downstairs and hurt herself. She could wander out into the street and get lost. Granny had been forgetful lately, but this was the first time she'd completely forgotten about Poppy. When they got upstairs, Granny was kneeling on the floor, gathering up the white tufts of stuffing and jamming them back to the hole she'd made in the couch. It wasn't in there, she said sadly. What wasn't? It was lost a long time ago, said Granny. My father told me about it. Lena sighed impatiently. More and more, her grandmother's mind seemed caught in the past. She could explain the rules of pebble jacks, which she'd last played when she was 8, or tell you what happened at the singing when she was 12, or who she danced with at the clothing square dance when she was 16, but she would forget about what happened the day before yesterday. They heard him talking about it when he died, she said to Lena. They heard who talking? My grandfather, the 7th mayor. And what did they hear him say? Ah, said her grandmother with a faraway look. That's the mystery. He said he couldn't get at it. Now it is lost, he said. But what was it? He didn't say. Lena gave up. It didn't matter anyway. Probably the lost thing was the old man's left sock, or his hairbrush. But for some reason, the story had taken root in Granny's mind. The next morning, on her way to work, Lena stopped in at the house of her neighbor, Eveline Murdo. Mrs. Murdo was brisk in her manner, and in her person thin and straight as a nail, but she was kind in her unsmiling way. Until a few years ago, she'd run a shop that sold paper and pencils, but when paper and pencils became scarce, her shop closed. Now, she spent her days sitting by her upstairs window, watching people in the street with her sharp eyes. Lena told Mrs. Murdo about her grandmother's forgetfulness. Will you look in on her sometimes and make sure things are all right? She asked. I will certainly, said Mrs. Murdo, nodding twice, firmly. Lena went away feeling better. That day, Lena was given a message by Arlen Swin, who ran the Cali Street vegetable market, to be delivered to Lena's friend Clary, the greenhouse manager. Lena was glad to carry this message, though her gladness was mixed a little with sadness. Her father had worked in the greenhouses. It still felt strange not to see him there. The 5 greenhouses produced all of Ember's fresh food. They were out past Greengate Square, at the farthest edge of the city. Nothing else was out there but the trash heaps, great, moldering, stinking hills that stood on rocky ground and were lit by a few floodlights high up on poles. It used to be that no one went to the trash heaps but the trash collectors, who dumped the trash and left it. Now and then a couple children might go there to play, scrambling up the side of the heaps and tumbling down. Lena and Lizzie used to go when they were younger. They'd pull out the occasional treasure, some empty cans, maybe an old hat or a cracked plate, but not anymore. Now, there were guards posted at the trash heaps to make sure no one poked around. Just recently, an official job called trash sifter had been created. Every day, a team of people methodically sorted through the trash heaps in search of anything that might be at all useful. They'd come back with broken chair legs that could be used for repairing window frames, bent nails that could become hooks for clothes, even filthy rags, stiff with dirt, that could be washed out and used to patch holes in window blinds or mattress covers. Lena hadn't thought about it before, but now she wondered about the trash sifters. Were they there because Ember really was running out of everything? Beyond the trash heaps, there was nothing at all. That is, only the vast unknown regions where the darkness was absolute. From the end of Diggory Street, Lena could see the long, low greenhouses. They looked like big tin cans that had been cut in half and laid on their sides. Her breath came a little faster. The greenhouses were home to her, in a way. She knew that she was most likely to find Clary somewhere around Greenhouse 1, where the office was, so that was where she headed first. A small tool shed stood beside the door to Greenhouse 1. Lena peeked into it, but saw only rakes and shovels. So she opened the greenhouse door. Warm, furry-smelling air washed over her, and all her love for this place came rushing back. Out of habit, she gazed up toward the ceiling, as if she might see her father there on his ladder, tinkering with the sprinkler system, the temperature gauges, and the lights. The greenhouse light was whiter than the yellowish light of the Ember street lamps. It came from long tubes that ran the length of the ceiling. In this light, the leaves of the plants shone so green they almost hurt Lena's eyes. On the days when she'd come here with her father, Lena had spent hours wandering along the gravel paths that ran between the vegetable beds, sniffing the leaves, poking her fingers into the dirt, and learning to tell the plants apart by their look and smell. There were the beans and peas with their curly tendrils, the dark green spinach, the ruffled lettuce, and the hard pale green cabbages, some of them as big as a newborn baby's head. What she loved best was to rub the leaves of the tomato plant between her fingers and breathe in their pungent, powdery smell. A long, straight path led from one end of the building to the other. About halfway down the path, Clary was crouching by a bed of carrots. Lena ran toward her, and Clary smiled, brushed the dirt from her hands, and stood up. Clary was tall and solid, with big hands and knobby knuckles. She had a square jaw and square shoulders, and brown hair cut in a short, squarish way. You might have thought from looking at her that she was a gruff, unfriendly person, but her nature was just the opposite. She was more comfortable with plants than with people, Lena's father had always said. She was strong but shy, a person of much knowledge but few words. Lena had always liked her. Even when she was little, Clary did not treat her like a baby, but gave her jobs to do, pulling up carrots, picking bugs off cabbages. Since her parents had died, Lena had come many times to talk to Clary, or just to work silently beside her. Clary was always kind to her, and working with the plants took Lena's mind off her grief. "Well," said Clary. She smiled at Lena, wiped her hands on her already grimy pants, and smiled some more. Finally, she said, "You're a messenger." "Yes," said Lena, "and I have a message for you. It's from Arlen Swin. Please add 4 extra crates to my order, 2 of potatoes and 2 of cabbages." Clary frowned. "I can't do that," she said. "At least, I can send in the cabbages, but only 1 small crate of potatoes." "Why?" asked Lena. "Well, we have sort of a problem with the potatoes." "What is it?" asked Lena. Clary had a habit of answering questions in the briefest possible way. You had to keep asking and asking before she would believe you really wanted to know and weren't just being polite. Then she would explain, and you could see how much she knew and how much she loved her work. "I'll show you," she said. She led the way to a bed where the green leaves were now spotted with black. "A new disease. I haven't seen it before. When you dig up the potatoes, they're runny inside instead of hard, and they stink. I'm going to have to throw out all the ones in this bed. There are only a few beds left that aren't infected." Most people in Ember had potatoes at every meal. Mashed, boiled, stewed, roasted. They'd had fried potatoes too in the days before the cooking oil ran out. "I'd hate it if we couldn't have potatoes anymore," Lena said. "I would too," said Clary. They sat on the edge of the potato bed and talked for a while, about Lena's grandmother and the baby, about the trouble Clary was having with the beehives, and about the greenhouse sprinkler system. "It hasn't worked right since—" Clary hesitated and glanced sideways at Lena. "For a long time," she said. She didn't want to say since your father died. Lena understood that. She stood up. "I should go," she said. "I have to take Arlen Swin the answer to his message." "I hope you'll come again," said Clary. You can come any time." Lena said thank you and turned to go. But just outside the greenhouse door, she heard running footsteps and a strange, high, sobbing sound. Or rather, she heard sobs and then a wail, sobs and then a shout, and then more sobs getting louder. She looked back toward the rear of the greenhouses, toward the trash heaps. "Clary," she called, "there's something—" Clary came out and listened too. "Do you hear it?" "Yes," said Clary. She frowned. "I'm afraid it's someone who—" She peered toward the crying noise. "Yes, here he comes." Her strong hand gripped Lena's shoulder for a moment. You'd better go, she said. I'll take care of this. But what is it? Never mind, just go on. But Lena wanted to see. Once Clary had walked away, she ducked behind the tool shed. From there, she watched. The noise came closer. Out beyond the trash heaps, a figure appeared. It was a man, running and stumbling, his arms flopping. He looked as if he were about to fall over, as if he could hardly pick up his feet. In fact, as he came closer, he did fall. He tripped over a hose and crumpled to the ground as if his bones had dissolved. Clary stooped low and said something to him in a voice too low for Lena to hear. The man was panting. When he turned over and sat up, Lena saw that his face was scratched and his eyes wide open in fright. His sobs had turned into hiccups. She recognized him. It was Saj Merle, one of the clerks in the supply depot. He was a quiet, long-faced man who always looked worried. Clary helped him to his feet. The two of them came slowly toward the greenhouse, and as they got closer, Lena could hear what the man was saying. He spoke very fast in a weak, trembly voice, hardly stopping for breath. Was just sure I could do it. I said to myself, just one step after another, that's all. One step after another. I knew it would be dark. Who doesn't know that? But I thought, well, dark can't hurt you. I'll just keep going. I thought... He stumbled and sagged against Clary. Careful, Clary said. They reached the door of the greenhouse, and Clary struggled to open it. Without thinking, Lena darted out from behind the tool shed and opened it for her. Clary shot her a quick frown, but said nothing. Saj didn't stop talking. But then the farther I went and the darker it was, and you can't just keep walking into black dark, can you? It's like a wall in front of you. I kept turning around to look at the lights of the city, because that's all there was to see. And then I'd say to myself, don't look back, keep moving. But I kept tripping and falling. The ground is rough out there. I scraped my hands. He held one up and stared at the red scratches on it, which oozed drops of blood. They got him into Clary's office and set him down on her chair. He rambled on. Be brave, I said to myself. I kept going and going, but then all of a sudden I thought, anything could be out here. There could be a pit 1,000 feet deep right in front of me. There could be something that bites. I've heard stories, rats as big as garbage cans. And I had to get out of there, so I turned around and I ran. Never mind, said Clary. You're all right now. Lena, get him some water. Lena found a cup and filled it from the sink in the corner. Saj took it with a shaking hand and drank it down. What were you looking for? Lena asked. She knew what she would have been looking for if she'd gone out there. She had thought about it countless times. Saj stared at her. He seemed to have to puzzle over her question. Finally, he said, I was looking for something that could help us. What would that be? I don't know. Like a stairway that leads somewhere, maybe. Or a building full of, I don't know, useful things. But you didn't find anything? Or see anything? Lena asked, disappointed. Nothing. There is nothing out there. His voice became a shout, and his eyes looked wild again. Or if there is, we can never get to it. Never. Not without a light. He took a long, shaky breath. For a while, he stared at the floor. Then, he stood up. I think I'm all right now. I'll be going. With uncertain steps, he went down the path and out the door. Well, said Clary, I'm sorry that happened while you were here. I was afraid you might be scared. That's why I told you to go. But Lena was full of questions, not fear. She had heard tales of people who tried to go out into the unknown regions. She had thought about it herself. In fact, she had wondered the same things as Saj. She had imagined making her way out into the dark and coming to a wall in which she would find the door to a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel would be another city, the city of light she had always dreamed about. All it would take was the courage to walk away from Ember and into the darkness, and then to keep going. It might have been possible if you could carry a light to show the way, but in Ember there was no such thing as a light you could carry with you. Outside lights were fixed to their poles, or to the roofs of houses. Inside lights were set into the ceiling, or had cords that had to be plugged in. Over the course of Ember's history, various clever people had tried to invent a movable light, but all of them had failed. One man had managed to ignite the end of a stick of wood by holding it against the electric burner on his stove. He'd run across the city with the flaming stick, planning to use it to light his journey, but by the time he got to the trash heaps, his torch had gone out. Other people latched on to this idea. One woman who lived on Deadlock Street, very near the edge of the city, managed to get into the unknown regions with her flaming stick. But the stick burned quickly, and before she could go far, the flames singed her hands and she threw it down. Everyone who had tried to penetrate the unknown regions had come back within a few hours, their enterprise a failure. Lena and Clary stood by the open door of the greenhouse and watched Saj shuffle toward the city. As he neared the trash heaps, two guards who had been sitting on the ground got to their feet. They walked over to Saj, and each of them took hold of one of his arms. Uh-oh, said Clary. Those guards are always looking for trouble. But Saj hasn't broken any law, said Lena. Doesn't matter. They need something to do. They'll get some fun out of scaring him. One of the guards was shaking his finger at Sag and saying something in a voice almost too loud enough for Lena to hear. Poor man, said Clary with a sigh. He's the fourth one this year. The guards were marching Sag away now, one on either side of him. Sag looked limp and small between them. What do you think is in the unknown regions, Clary? Clary stared down at the ground, where the light from the greenhouse was casting long, thin shadows of them both. I don't know. Nothing, I guess. And do you think Ember really is the only light in the dark world? Clary sighed. I don't know, she said. She gave Lena a long look. Her eyes, Lena thought, looked a little sad. They were a deep brown, almost the color of the earth in the garden bed. Clary put a hand in her pocket and drew something out. Look, she said. In the palm of her hand was a white bean. Something in this seed knows how to make a bean plant. How does it know that? I don't know, said Lena, staring at the hard, flat bean. It knows because it has life in it, said Clary. But where does life come from? What is life? Lena could see the words were welling up in Clary now. Her eyes were bright. Her cheeks were rosy. Take a lamp, for instance. When you plug it in, it comes alive in a way. It lights up. That's because it's connected to a wire that's connected to the generator, which is making electricity, though don't ask me how. But a bean seed isn't connected to anything. Neither are people. We don't have plugs and wires that connect us to generators. What makes living things go is inside them somehow. Her dark eyebrows drew together over her eyes. What I mean is, she said finally, something is going on that we don't understand. They say the builders made the city. But who made the builders? Who made us? I think the answer must be somewhere outside of Ember. In the unknown regions? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. She brushed her hands together in a time to get back to work sort of way. Clary, said Lena quickly, here's what I think. Her heart sped up. She hadn't told this to anyone before. In my mind, I see another city. Lena watched to see if Clary was going to laugh at her, or smile in that overly kind way. She didn't, so Lena went on. It isn't like Ember. It's white and gleaming. The buildings are tall and sort of sparkle. Everything is bright, not just inside the buildings, but all around them too, even up in the sky. I know it's just my imagination, but it feels real. I think it is real. Clary said, and then she said, where would such a city be? That's what I don't know, or how to get to it. I keep thinking there's a door somewhere, maybe out in the unknown regions. A door that leads out of Ember, and then behind the door, a road. Clary just shrugged her shoulders. I don't know, she said. I have to get back to work. But here, take this. She handed Lena the bean seed, took a little pot from the shelf, scooped some dirt into it, and handed the pot to Lena. Stick the bean in here and water it every day, she said. It looks like nothing, like a little white stone. But inside it, there's life. That must be a sort of clue, don't you think? If we could just figure it out. Lena took the seed and the pot. Thank you, she said. She wanted to give Clary a hug, but she didn't, in case it would embarrass her. Instead, she just said goodbye and raced back toward the city. So that's where we're going to stop for today. I know this is kind of a long video, but I wanted to read both of those chapters, and I'm super excited to pick it back up tomorrow and see if we can learn more about Ember and about what's really going on. Bye!